What's happening here? Jesus really told people, if you pray very hard and you really believe it, you can take that mountain over there and move it and throw it into the sea. What? Was he kidding? Let's figure it out. Let's look at the text. And here it is. This is Mark 11. So the first thing I want you to notice is that we have a sandwich here. A, B, A. You know, like a cheeseburger, you have A at the top and you have A at the bottom and you have B in the middle. Can you see what's happening here at the top? There's the beginning of a fig tree episode. That episode is finished at the bottom. That's why we have two A's here. And in the middle is some other stuff, just like a cheeseburger. Here we go. Before you eat it, let's label it real quick. Here's the thing, Mark's Gospel has a bunch of these sandwiches, and every time it's deliberate. If you've never noticed this, I'm going to tell you why you probably haven't noticed it. It's because we've been taught by our churches to rip the Bible to shreds, and to take a verse here and a verse there, and instead of seeing how it all hangs together, we're lost. Anyway, sandwiches in Mark's Gospel, they are a thing. If you've forgotten why we're doing this, look down here, verse 23. Truly I tell you, if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, and if you do not doubt in your heart, but believe that what you say will come to pass, it will be done for you. It's right there. This is where the mechanics of eating a sandwich really come into play. And I hope you're not the kind of person that takes a sandwich or a burger and then disassembles it and eats the pieces individually. What's the point of paying someone to put the whole thing together? Anyway, I digress. Every single one of Mark's sandwiches are deliberate. The way it works is you bite into the whole thing. The two A parts and the B part in the middle, they quote-unquote interpret each other. You know, it's just like that eating experience of a burger or a sandwich. It's the same thing here. We have to keep this whole thing together, and we have to see how the three pieces relate to each other. Now, when you have a literary sandwich as opposed to a cheeseburger, the climax happens in the last third. That's down here. That's exactly where our text is that we're wondering about, whether Jesus was kidding or what. Even though the climax is down here, we still have to start at the top. That's how you read a text. You have to keep the thing together. So what do we find up there? What we find is this. There's this fig tree that wasn't supposed to have any fruit on it because, as it says there, it was not the season for figs. And yet, Jesus cursed the poor thing. What do we do with this? Well, we don't know yet. We have to read the whole thing in order to figure that out. Let's look at the B part. He's immediately in the temple. He overturns the tables in the temple, and he criticizes what the temple has become. Now you have to remember, if you are in an oral society, then your brain is still going to work, and you are going to notice immediately that the fig tree at the top that's up here is a symbol for the temple right there. Remember how I told you that Mark's sandwiches are very deliberate. The two A parts, this one and this one, will always interpret the bit in the middle. So that is how that kind of thing works. And again, in order to see that, we have to read the whole thing instead of plucking a verse here and part of a verse there. Before we move to the bottom part, notice this right here. This quotation from the Old Testament, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. Isn't it sad that we have totally forgotten, like they were in danger of forgetting, that they existed as God's people for the sake of the nations, in other words, for the sake of the world. I see so many Christians today who are nationalistic and protective and entitled of their rights. This is our land, even though we took it away from other people and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, back to this. Make a mental note of this as we move on to the bottom part. And here it is. Look at that. The fig tree has withered right here. Remember, the fig tree had done nothing wrong, but Jesus cursed it and it withered. This obviously means that this is a metaphor. The fig tree stands for something else. For what? Well, obviously for the bit in the middle, which is the temple. The temple is going to wither. It is going to be thrown away. And I want you to notice also that right here in this section, The prayer is for the temple to be thrown into the sea. Now you have to understand that the sea was itself a metaphor in antiquity, often for evil. That's why there are these flood stories. There are stories where evil is being purged by water. So the temple will be purged. It's the temple that's being thrown into the sea. And that temple, guess what, was on a mountain, the Temple Mount. So, how did we get back to the fig tree? Well, Jesus had thrown out these money changers and so on. He had figuratively exercised judgment on the temple. The temple is toast. It is done as far as Jesus is concerned. So, in the morning, they walk back out towards Bethany, out of the temple area, out of Jerusalem. Bethany is just outside of Jerusalem. And that's when they see that fig tree. The whole thing comes together quite well. We just need to pay attention and read the whole thing instead of that verse plucking thing. One last thing down here, verse 25, when you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone. So please remember, the role of the temple was to essentially mediate forgiveness between God and his people, and ultimately, therefore, God and the world. The world, the nations, they're right there. See that in verse 17. So in their thinking, the temple was needed to mediate forgiveness, and Jesus basically says, no, throw the wretched thing into the sea where it belongs, evil to evil. It's going to be purged there, which means basically it's going to be destroyed, just like the flood destroyed a lot of things. And instead, your capacity to forgive and your obligation to forgive is now tied to your faith. Have faith in God, it says right here in verse 22. How I wish that Christianity had actually learned to give a rip about what Jesus wants. Imagine we wouldn't have all these temples, because that's really what they are. First Baptist this and some other cool that. I travel all over the country, and especially in the South, I sometimes see churches that are called temple. And I'm thinking, hey, as much as I hate this entire notion of institutionalized faith, at least these people have the guts to call it what it is, a temple. Like the kind of thing that Jesus wanted to throw into the sea. Might as well be honest about what we're doing, and it's definitely not what Jesus had in mind. I don't know what you think about my content, but if you appreciate scholarly stuff that is also provocative and you think this is worth doing and worth having, please go to patreon.com/prohibition theology, pick a tier, subscribe, get the content, the deeper content on that platform, and support this work.